Hey y'all, Organizing Higher, welcome or welcome back. Usually I talk about organization, productivity tips, tools, and resources on this channel, especially GTD and Todoist, but this video is going to be a little bit different. So when I was just getting started on YouTube and kind of figuring out what I wanted to talk about, I shared my journey into my career, which is in higher education, specifically in the area of student affairs. And so some people have found my channel because of the video that I talked about with my experience in being a student affairs professional. And someone asked me to share about my experience with grad school, applying for grad schools and selecting a grad school and all of that. So I figured I would share a little bit about my experience, particularly how I kind of organized myself and the thought process that I went through when I was applying for grad school. So if you're interested or thinking about getting a master's in student affairs and higher education, then definitely keep watching. So before anything, I had to decide if I actually wanted to go and get a master's degree. I was already pretty much over college, and it was junior, maybe senior year when I started really even thinking about graduate school. And the main reason why I decided that ultimately graduate school was for me was because I was looking at positions that I would be interested in. So I found random positions on higheredjobs.com or a school's website, and I looked to see what the qualifications were. So once I decided I wanted to get a degree, I had to figure out what qualifications I had for degree programs. There are so many degree programs out there. Did I want something online? Did I want something in person? Did I want something hybrid? So I ultimately did some research. I think NASPA had, and maybe they still have, like a directory of graduate programs. So that was a great place for me to start. I ultimately decided for myself, I wanted to leave the state of California, which is my home state. I wanted to get a new experience. I wanted to get new exposure, but I wanted to stay within the United States because I didn't want too much complexity. So that really narrowed it down for me. The other thing I made sure that I was looking for in all of my positions was tuition or some type of tuition assistance, particularly in the form of a graduate assistantship. So before I had done research and learned a little bit about graduate school, I hadn't even heard of graduate assistantships, and I didn't understand that you can go to graduate school for little or no cost, because these graduate assistantships a lot of time come with tuition assistance, plus you get a stipend. So you get paid as a regular job for your assistantship work, and you get your tuition paid. So having an assistantship as part of the program was super, super important to me, but also having the assistantship and program acceptance go hand in hand. There are some programs that you could get an assistantship, but maybe not get accepted into the program. And there were some programs where you could get accepted in the program, but they didn't guarantee you an assistantship. One other thing that I looked for, which might sound kind of weird, but I really did not want to write a thesis. I thought it was really scary, and imposter syndrome to the fullest. I was just like, I can't do a thesis. And so I looked for a program where a thesis was optional or just plain not required. There were other little minor things that I looked for. I looked for, what was the makeup of the degree program in terms of the classes? What was the cohort size? Was it cohort based? So getting an idea of the types of things that were important to me was really, really helpful. Location, the size of the school, how many people in the program were in the field after 5 or 10 years, and that directory from NASPA, I'm pretty sure it was NASPA, that directory basically spelled out all that information. So how I kept myself organized through this process was I had a flash drive. This was back in the day. They didn't really have cloud storage back then. And I had a flash drive that had all of my materials on there. I had an Excel spreadsheet. I'll put a picture of that here if I can find it. I had an Excel spreadsheet that basically spelled out all of the schools that I was interested in, whether they hit the certain criteria or not, what the tuition was, how many units were required. So I was able to see at a glance kind of some of my top contenders for school. I only actually ended up applying to 2 schools, Indiana State University and Ball State, which are both in the state of Indiana. I had no affinity for Indiana per se, it just happened to work out that way. And I had heard from a lot of people in student affairs that pretty much all the best student affairs master's programs were in the Midwest for whatever reason. And so I really had a bias towards a school that was in the Midwest. Now, granted, you can get a phenomenal education and a great master's degree from any school, but for me, it was really about the experience that I was going to get as well. So it wasn't just like, oh, I got to go to the Midwest for the best programs, but I actually happened to see that some of the most robust programs for me and what I was looking for were in the Midwest. So I applied to Indiana State University and Ball State. They were two very different programs. I learned the Indiana State University program was a 2-year program. The assistantship was guaranteed. The curriculum was a little bit different because it was a 2-year program. They had a summer session where you didn't have to be on campus, but you had classes. So the summer classes were online between the first and second year, and it was cohort based. For Ball State, I don't remember a ton. I do remember it was a 1-year program, which once I got into my program at Indiana State, I realized how incredibly fast that would have been. I don't think I would have been happy in a 1-year program because by the time you're in classes and studying, you're already thinking about applying for a job. You don't have time to like immerse yourself into the experience. So I'm glad that I went with a 2-year program. 1-year programs can work great, but again, it just wasn't what I was looking for. So once I had decided the 2 schools that I was going to apply for, then I had to figure out what the requirements are for application. So there's usually an application. In some instances, you apply for graduate school and then you apply for the program. And the application is not necessarily the same and the due dates are not necessarily the same. So I think for ISU, the graduate program and the student affairs program were the same. So that was easy. But I think for Ball State, they were a little bit different. So being aware of the deadlines associated with application is like priority number 1. I also had to figure out whether or not I needed to take the GRE. I actually ended up taking the GRE, even though it wasn't a requirement for my program, and I think they've phased it out altogether in a lot of student affairs programs in general. But I took the GRE just to have it available, and I was aware of any type of scores that they might be looking for. I made sure that I was thoughtful about when I took the GRE to make sure that I took it before the due date for the application. So everything had to be really timed and coordinated. I also made sure that I was getting my letters of recommendation that I needed to get. I talked to certain professors that I thought would be able to write me good letters. I gave them all of the information that they might need about me. I gave them deadlines in order to be able to write me those letters of recommendation. I started pretty early. I started asking for letters of recommendation probably about October or November, even though the deadline for the application wasn't until March. That's because I really wanted to make sure that I built in some buffer time for myself. So I only ended up applying to 2 schools pretty much intentionally. It wasn't a, let me just apply to as many schools and see where I get into. I was really at the point where if I don't get into one of these 2 schools, I'm not going to get a master's degree because I would not have been happy anywhere else. And I didn't want to compromise my contentment just to get a degree. So I said, well, if it doesn't work out, then maybe that's just a sign that this is not the time right now. I'll go into something else. I thought I was going to go into the Peace Corps. I thought about being an MFT. I had a couple of other kind of backup plans if going to graduate school didn't work out. Plus, I had gotten a job that I was working full-time while I was applying for graduate schools, and I could fall back on that if I needed to. So once I submitted my applications, I pretty much just waited to hear back. I had interviews, phone interviews with both programs. Both of the programs had a like open house of sorts where you were invited to come to the campus, meet people, listen to folks. I think they had on-site interviews for assistantships. I was in California, and financially it would have been very difficult for me to travel all the way to Indiana to be able to, particularly just 2 schools, just to be able to do a 1-day interview process. So fortunately, both programs allowed me to do phone interviews. And so I did phone interviews with both of them. And to me, that really says something that they were willing to accommodate me, that they were actively aware of how they would increase the diversity of their program if they were looking at folks who were outside of, the state or the region, because a lot of people in the program were local. They were from Indiana, maybe they were from Indiana State specifically, or Ball State specifically, or they were from Ohio or Michigan or somewhere somewhat nearby. So it wouldn't have been so cumbersome for them to get out there. But coming from California was kind of a big deal for me. And I was a college student still at the time. So to be able to drop, $500 or $700 to get out there and get a hotel, that was kind of a lot of money for me. So I just waited to hear back after my interviews, and I'm very fortunate. I remember the day that I got the acceptance email from Indiana State, and I was so excited. I was so thrilled. to be able to get in, and the rest is history. So I just wanted to share with you my experience in applying to graduate schools, kind of the thought process that I used to apply to schools, and the metrics and the measures that kept me on track and on pace to make sure that when I did get into a program, that it was something that I wanted to do and that it would be value added for me. So if you're in student affairs or you're thinking about student affairs and that's how you found this channel, let me know if there are other questions that you have about my experience. If you have other questions that you want me to maybe make a video about something, let me know, and I'm happy to share my experience. Particularly with student affairs, you know, it's such a smaller field. I think there's not a ton of information that's out there, so I'm happy to share with anybody any insight or questions that you might have and share my experience. Thanks so much for watching and have a great week.